Well, welcome back, everybody. Today's episode is a special treat as my longtime friend and colleague, Brian Watson, is guest hosting. Many of you know that a few years ago, Brian and I wrote the book titled Confessions of a Successful CIO: How the Best CIOs Tackle Their Toughest Business Challenges. Published by Wiley, the book went on to be incredibly successful and, in fact, was rated amongst Amazon's top-rated books for months. But that's not the story here today. The story is that we shine the light on 9 of the best leaders known for their bet the farm moments and their proven history of answering the call when their company needed it most. One of those leaders was Steve Bandrowczak, who is writing one of the best CIO to CEO stories of our era. Steve's a turnaround guy and what we refer to as the fixer in the book. So with that, I want to thank Steve for allowing us to share the latest chapters of his journey. And with that, Brian, I will turn it over to you.
When I was getting started as editor-in-chief of CIO Insight a while back, I needed to know who were the best CIOs that I should be talking to, who were simply the best around. And a mentor of mine, someone a lot of you may know, Abby Lumberg, the legendary editor of CIO Magazine and now MIT Sloan Management Review, I asked her, the first person she said without hesitation was Steve Bandrowczak. Why? She said because he's doing amazing work and he's the straightest shooter you'll meet. And she was right. I've had the pleasure of knowing and learning from Steve for more than 15 years. I've watched him rise from CIO roles at DHL and Nortel to business executive positions at Avaya, HP, and Alight. And that's a big thread in his story. We'll unpack a lot of his inspiring leadership journey throughout this episode, which I'm calling the blueprint for CIO success. Steve's now the CEO of Xerox, the legendary technology pioneer that turns 118 this month. And he's using all of his expertise in technology and business to chart a major transformation of the way that Xerox operates and innovates. Steve and I will talk about his roots, his CIO tenure, and his rise to the CEO role, along with some of his favorite leadership principles, some of which he shared with Dan Roberts and me in our book, Confessions of a Successful CIO, which featured in-depth stories of 9 world-class IT leaders, including Steve. So we'll get to Steve's origin story, which has all kinds of lessons in and of itself. But Steve, before we go there, did you ever imagine back then that you'd be playing such major roles in a C-level position at such large companies, some of which I mentioned, and appearing regularly on TV networks like CNBC?
Brian, never in a million years. You know my humble background. I started in South Ozone Park, Queens, and come from a humble upbringing. Never did I imagine I'd sit as CEO of a Fortune company. And certainly have an impact on the world and have an impact on companies. And when I look back on it, many of the lessons I learned are in hindsight as opposed to looking forward and really learning from it. And so we'll talk a lot about what I learned, but the reality was never in a million years that I think that I'd be sitting in a CEO role when I first started my career.
I can imagine. I know we're going to talk about some of the threads of the things that from what you've done and what you learned along the way. I think we're going to talk about some of those leadership principles and philosophies that you have. And I think a lot of it comes back to to the beginning and kind of your story of how you weren't in IT and then you found your way into IT, and we'll unravel all that. But can you share a little bit more? We come from nearby New York natives. And I really love the story that you told us in the past about, kind of where you started off and then how you got headed on a different trajectory.
Yeah, look, if you grew up in South Ozone Park, Queens, graduated from Copiague High School, not exactly the CEO capitals of the world, left my family and my home when I was 16, got disowned. Used to spend in the love of my life, my wife, for 44 years now. And we started our journey. We literally on weekends when I left my home, we'd go and look for scrap in garbages, copper and steel and anything we can do to bring to scrap yards. And I say that because that beginning gave me the grit and gave me a lot of my lessons and a lot of my leadership skills going forward. It's one of those things where you don't know it as you're going through it, but in hindsight, you realize where you got some of the grit from. And, we'll talk about leadership skills, but one of them is about being fearless and not letting anything get in your way of success in terms of doing the right things and doing things that, some people just are scared of. And, because of my background and because of my beginnings, I don't fear anything. You can take anything away from me and put me in a parking lot, and my wife and I and my family will do just fine. We can survive. And it comes from those humble beginnings.
That's incredible. It's such a unique background. And I know from you saying that those aren't just words. It comes through in everything and all the experiences that we've had. And then so technology was your pathway into the corporate career. And I know you started a friend tipped you off basically, right? And
Yeah, I was, my father-in-law, my future father-in-law, God bless his soul now, but I started working on Long Island Railroad in helping and raising railroad from ground level to elevated level. And I got too comfortable. I was there a couple of years, after high school, and Dad actually fired me. He said, "Nope, you're too smart. You need to get your butt back to school," and he fired me. And I literally started at the time. They had something called Grumman Data Systems Institute, 6-month program to learn operations and how to operate computers, how to operate printers, etc. Went through that for 6 months, and I got my first job at Sweber Electronics, which is now known as Arrow, one of the biggest competitors of Avnet. But I worked midnight to 8 in the morning. Then started going to Nassau Community College, for getting my 2-year degree, and I then went on to programming. That really started my computer career. It took me 10 years to get my bachelor's degree. I working full time at night. But that's really where I started from, literally from the roots, from night shift operations. And, it's one of the blessings that I've had as you ascend to a CIO role, starting from operations and having programming and running different things, major projects, technology. You get an understanding, but you also get an empathy for what the teams are going through and what it means to roll out projects. And when you get outages in the middle of the night at 2 o'clock in the morning, right? You because you've been there, you understand it, and it gives you a different perspective when you're a CIO. And so I have always loved my background in terms of understanding what people do, the empathy for it, but more importantly, having the ability to walk in the shoes. So when we talk or when we have a specific issues or an outage, you've been there before and you can understand the situation.
That's right. I love hearing leaders talk about that. That you're never too far away from where you started or where you grew up, and that does give you the understanding and the empathy and helps you lead better, right? Because you've been what everybody else is struggling with right now. You've been through plenty of times. You have the scars, but you also have the way through.
No question.
Right, right. So you eventually became a CIO and a business leader. We'll get to the Xerox story. You're sitting in your office there in Norwalk, Connecticut. So you've been in multiple companies, multiple industries. And I think back to our conversations over time, we've been fortunate enough to have a lot of these in different contexts about leadership. I'm reminded of a few key phrases. Dan likes to call these isms. So I'll borrow the phrase and call them Steve-isms. That have made a big difference and have been, again, another big thread or through line for your career thus far. And I'd appreciate if you could share your philosophy with some of our listeners, knowing that, again, these come from experience, not from leadership books. The first quote, and this goes back to the Confessions book and your DHL experience, but I know it's also come up from HP and Alight and others. But I don't want to crawl to mediocrity. I want to run to greatness. I love that one. I always remember that one. I remember we used to put it on slides for our presentations about the book. But tell us where that comes from and what that means for you.
If you think about today, and it applies so much even in today's world, I say a lot, today is the slowest technology will ever be in our life, meaning that change is only going to accelerate. And if you're going to go through change, you're going to do something hard, you're going to put in a new system, new process, whatever it may be. At the end of it, why would you want to be mediocre? Why wouldn't you want to be great? And so the idea is that why would you crawl to mediocrity, meaning go through big, hard programs, big transformation, big change, and at the end of it, you're just mediocre? Why not run to great? And it's around going faster. It's around going harder. It's around aspiring to do hard things. It's around aspiring to get to greatness as opposed to just mediocrity. And so my philosophy is if you're going to go through all this change, and we'll talk about Xerox and the reinvention, at the end of it, don't you want to be great? Don't you want to be best? And people look at it and say, wow, I can't believe it, right? And so whether it was, spinning out the IBM PC division and helping to build Lenovo, you think about that, it was a tremendous story that's in Harvard Business Review. It's a tremendous story in terms of one of the only companies that came out of China that's on a global basis. That's running to great. Crawling to mediocrity would have been, staying number 5 market share. You're not aspiring to be number 1, right? And so for me, if you're going to go through all the change and you're going to go through all the hard things of driving change, aspire to be the best when you get out of it. All right. And that's got a lot of attributes to it, by the way, Brian, because a lot of companies don't even know what great looks like. I talk about benchmarking, right? What's the best in class from an IT standpoint, finance standpoint, receivables, payables, all those key attributes of business functions. If you're going to go through that, simple example, you're going to reinvent your entire cash process, and your DSOs are, worst in the industry. When you're done transforming your entire cash process and now you're middle of the road, why bother? Why wouldn't you want to be best in class when you're all said and done, right? And so that's what I mean, that don't crawl to that mediocrity, run to great, and get there fast.
That's one of the other things is your ability to kind of quote all the key metrics from different companies that you've worked at over the years and still know them, because that's what makes you tick. That's really interesting. And another one that is related in a lot of ways is the art of the possible. And I've heard you talk about that through a number of different leadership roles. And what's the art of the possible for you? What does it mean? And maybe what was it? Was there an aha moment for you in your past that sort of led you to that philosophy?
It's one of those things where in hindsight, I say yes, but as I was going through it, I'd be lying if I thought it, forward, right? And so early in my career, I was able to see how technology can change business processes, whether it was around, and again, aging myself a little bit, you think about at the time, we didn't have wide area networks. We didn't have local area networks. We didn't have distributed computing like we have today. And so one of the early things I did in my career, I remember presenting to a board about what it would mean to have DEC-VAX systems, right? Digital distributed computing, and how that was going to change industries, how that was going to change the way people work. And I was very early in my career. There were people who have been much more seasoned in the business, had owned big P&Ls, but they didn't see the vision of what distributed computing would actually do to drive change in businesses, what networks would do. Ultimately, it became, the internet, et cetera. But I've always had the ability to see technology and how it changed and drove change from a business standpoint and an outcome. And so I've always had that ability to be able to see that. And when you can see it, it's talking about the art of the possible. Many, many people start with, well, I can't, or it's not going to happen, or I can't get the business convinced, or I know what's happening. And so for me, it's the art of the possible is creating a vision that everybody has aspired to go to, and then having the tenacity to drive that change and get them there. The difference between ideas and innovation, ideas sit in people's belly, innovation, people act on them. And typically the difference between ideas and innovation is fear. It's the vision, it's the motivation, it's the ability to get everybody inspired and do things that they never could do. Sports analogies, not all the time did the teams with the best players win. The teams that have the right vision in terms of how they work together, how they can function together, how they can go through training camp, practice, and ultimately lead to a championship. It's all about that art of the possible. We can and we will. And that's a big difference. So I've always used the art of the possible in my entire career, seeing that. And it plays out today, Brian. We're going to talk about AI in a few minutes, but it plays out today, right? CIOs are asked to really set the vision of the art of the possible and then drive business change.
Again, comes through so much about in our conversations and what we're talking about today, that you were a CIO for a long part of your career, but you were a business executive first. And that's a compelling part of your trajectory that you've talked about the ability to go from CIO to business roles, to have those opportunities just made such a massive difference along the way. I was wondering if you could tell us about some of those roles, because I think, there's a lot of folks out there that would like to ascend the latter and maybe see some natural ways to do it. But yours were a little different. So I wonder if you could tell us about some of those roles and how they made a difference for you in your journey.
Yeah, some of them were a little bit accidental, right? When I was at Lenovo, I was one of the best salespeople at Lenovo. Why? Because we were using the technology internally to drive change internally within the company, and therefore speaking to other CIOs about how we were using that technology was extremely powerful. So I would go on and I'd get pulled into sales calls, I'd get pulled into large, executive briefing centers to talk about how we were using technology internally to drive and change what we were doing with Lenovo. And then other CIOs would resonate with, oh, this is how you're using this technology. Same thing at Hewlett Packard, the same thing at other jobs that I had been in. When I was at DHL, we had something called Alogis. Alogis was a software platform for global logistics to help companies with their global logistics and supply chain see transparency to where products were going from and going to. How do we align things like merging traffic, meaning that you had ordered something from China and it had to get together with something in Mexico, meaning those two parts needed to come together before I can complete assembly. It's called merge in transit. We had something called Alogis that was developed and was part of the IT organization. Well, you can't develop something like that unless you understand supply chain, unless you understand the business. And so again, I'd be one of the greatest assets of the company to be able to go and talk to other CIOs, other large supply chain leaders, other leaders who ran warehouse distribution, consolidation of supply chains, consolidation of whether it was air traffic, ground traffic, shipping traffic, merge all those things together to create a new supply chain. And so because you were developing solutions, it happened to be in IT, but you knew an awful lot about business. You learned an awful lot about how things work in the business world. Same thing when I got to Hewlett Packard. I started there as a CIO. I moved very quickly into we call internal shared services, running all the shared services for HP, and then ultimately adding to that business process outsourcing the BPO group, which took those same services and served customers on the outside. I was the best reference. Why? Because I talk about how we would improve services like finance inside of HP from what we were doing with our shared services. We then can go to external customers and say, look, this is how we're using technology to drive improvement in our financial processes, right? So it was a natural adjacency to what we were doing. Underpinning it was technology, right? What we were doing and how we were using technology to improve processes, to improve the things that we were doing.
So using the language of the business to describe the power of technology, which I think is
right.
Right.
I talk about communications, and I say this a lot. When somebody says, I don't understand you, it's your problem because you're not communicating the right way. And so in order to get the attention, and by the way, it's not business. We put this big label business. When you talk to the CFO, it's different than talking to the marketing person, different than talking to the head of sales, different than talking to the head of supply chain, different than talking to the legal department. All of them have their own languages, all have a different attention span based on the conversation you're having. You go into a CFO and you give a CFO a whole lot of marketing pitch, you're going to lose that individual in about 30 seconds. You go and talk to the CMO and you start to talk about spreadsheets and numbers, you're going to lose the CMO, right? And so you've got to be able to have that translation of technology, vision, but more importantly, understand the language of the business leaders that you're talking to in order to be able to communicate. By the way, that same thing happens with boards as well. CISOs have all kinds of trouble speaking at boards. CIOs have trouble speaking at the boards, all right? Because they don't understand the board members, what their role is, what their language is. And so we hear a lot, well, CIOs, they go into boards and they don't do real well, or CISOs go into boards and don't do real well because they don't understand the language and what they're trying to communicate.
That's someone said to me that boards speak in spreadsheets and too often business leaders speak in dashboards. And those are two very different languages. Going back to the experiences, and I'm thinking back, I literally remember when you went from 1 week being the CIO at HP to heading up GBS and BPO. And I just said like, wow, I mean, what a whirlwind of things. And it all makes sense as the way you laid it out. But, there's still a lot of CIOs out there that say, they'll read about this, they'll hear about this, and they'll say, I want that. I want those opportunities. But a lot of the time they don't know how to get there. And I'm wondering, you've had some interesting experiences about, kind of how you answer that call, how you prepare yourself to get that call. Sometimes it's raising your hand, but some of those interesting situations, I wonder if you could boil down a little bit about how did you make those opportunities happen for yourself?
Well, let's start with career development and career device, right? You're never, ever, ever going to run a marathon unless you train. You're never going to be a great guitarist, or you're never going to be a great drummer or a sax player unless you practice, unless you lay out exactly where you're going and you're practicing those. And so you want to sit in a CEO role, you want to sit in a CMO role or a chief revenue officer role, whatever that C-suite is. I always ask CIOs, what'd you do to prepare for it? What did you do? Did you take a sales role? Okay, when I was at Nortel, if you remember, I took a step back from CIO to a regional sales leader in the Americas. Okay, I wanted to run a sales team. Big difference. Okay, CIOs who have IT experience, who have been operators or who run networks or run CISOs, whatever it may be, there's a big difference sitting in that seat and watching that seat. And so for me, I have always said, okay, what are the incremental skills I need on my resume to prepare to the job that I want? Not necessarily the job that I have, number one. Number two, I have always communicated what I would like to do and where I'd like to go, and therefore building a network of individuals that through my career path help me out. Okay? And so when you think about your network and you think about your communication, your people, there's a couple of things. One, keep working on your skills. Skills at the board level, skills at the CEO level, skills at the C-suite level. What skills do you need? What don't you have? Okay? Second, communicate it. It's okay. 3 years, I want to be sitting in CEO seat. You may not take that seat, but at least the community around you knows what you're trying to do. Okay? And then the last piece is don't fool yourself with the gap that you have. Okay? Anybody who ever thinks they're ready for a CEO role without doing it, you're fooling yourself. Nobody prepares you for this role. Okay? You can see it from all different venues. You can get sales leadership skills, all the skills that I had getting in here. Nobody prepares you for the role. What you do, though, is you get ready with the best leadership skills that you have. You get understanding how to build the best team that you can do so that when you get in that seat, you're successful. All right. And so for CIOs, many times when I ask, like, what would you like to do? I'd like to be a CEO someday. Great. What are you doing about it? Well, I went and I got my MBA. Really? That's enough? Did you run a sales team? Did you make sales calls? Did you sit in the CFO's office? Have you taken a marketing role? Okay. And so there are things to help you get prepared and build it, but truly look at an honest look at your resume and say, if I submitted that to anybody on the outside, what would that gap look like to the next job that you want? Okay. You can't wish yourself to success. It's not going to happen. Okay. You and I both know leaders, whether it's, from P&G to GM, you pick it, CIOs that had gotten to leadership roles wasn't by accident. They did something to drive change in the business. They did something, whether it's around analytics, use the platform and the opportunities that you have to create a broader role. Shared services, great way to get it in. Shared services has a lot of alignment with IT, tremendous amount of alignment with IT. That's an easy entry, okay? But if you're in a business that's selling technology or needs technology to advance your business, go make sales calls. Go spend time. Hey, twice in my career, I was salesperson of the year as a CIO.
I don't know many people who can say that. That's
Okay.
interesting.
But you get there because, I was the best door opener when I was at Lenovo. similar to when I was at HP. John Henshaw was unbelievable at open doors. Okay, Ramon Baez, unbelievable. Myself, Naresh, all the people that were there were CIOs, went and had the great ability to open doors because of the experience we have and the way we were solving problems internally. We used to call it HP on HP, right? HP technology to solve HP problem, all right? And when we have that, we become the greatest asset to the sales team. But if you don't want to make sales calls, you're never going to learn it.
Yeah. And then the other examples you gave, I mean, we talk so much about IT, sees all across the business, touches all points of the business, but you're going to become a better CIO if you understand what the day in the life is for all those different functions.
No question. I used to, at DHL, I used to do ride-alongs, right? Go out in the field and ride along. Ride and pickup. See what pickup and delivery looks like. I used to go into the sort centers, see what happens when a plane lands and how they unload planes and what they need to do, right? So spending time and really seeing the operations, spending time in the operations, rolling up your sleeve and actually picking products, loading products, shipping products. You learn an awful lot about the business when you spend time in the business.
Right. You got to get your hands on it. That's right. Well, let's talk about your business now. So you're leading a pretty big change at a company that many of our listeners are familiar with, have worked with. Catch us up on what you're doing at Xerox.
Yeah, first of all, what an incredible brand. We have been driving productivity and transformation in the workplace for a long time. And if you go back to, Palo Alto, what we did with the mouse and Ethernet, what you see, what you get, what you see around multifunctional printers. And so our specialty, Brian, and will continue to be there, is really driving productivity in the workplace. When COVID hit, we went into this hybrid world and a combination of in-office, working from home, working from Starbucks, working from airplanes, didn't matter. But we never really changed our processes and we never really changed our tools. Even today with Zoom and with Teams, it only changed the way we physically communicate. It didn't change the way we operate. All right. And so Xerox today, and everybody, when you look at paper, many of our processes, in fact, I would say 90+% of all processes digitize, but it digitized a paper workflow, right? So one of the misunderstandings of Xerox is we play in that physical to digital to physical. And there is an incredible ecosystem in which we play today in and around process flow. So simple example, you think about a multifunctional device today where you can scan something and print something. I've got a GPU chip, an operating system, and I've got the ability to be able to take whether it's scanned or printed, put it in the cloud, run AI, run RPA, and workflow on top of it. Now I can do things like when you scan an invoice, take your invoice and run it all the way back through your back-end payable systems. I can now scan resumes, take a look at that resume, run AI against it, and tell you the probability of how it aligns with your open recs today. I can scan a piece of paper that is a document and I can translate it to multiple languages, not just a physical translation, but a voice translation. So the first big thing that we're doing is really trying to drive productivity in the workplace with the technology and the capabilities that we already have. The hybrid workplace, you think about where you're working today, Brian, but you go take a look at a big corporation like a Citibank or JP Morgan, you go pick it, and now you got workers at home. The last thing you want is the annual report that's supposed to go in the CEO's office printing at somebody's home. Well, we have the technology and we do it today. We'll redact that document because the security infrastructure, we know who it's supposed to go to. We know where it's supposed to be encrypted in motion, and we know what should be redacted. Well, that's not a print company anymore. We're now in the data and knowledge world. By the way, when you scan something, we now can put it into intelligent document flows, things like inside of law offices. When you scan a contract, we can look at that contract for things that we're looking for, whether it's around compliance, whether it's around terms and conditions, whether it's around SEC compliance regulations, whatever it may be. There are things we can look for now and put intelligence on top of that document. So the first thing we're doing is taking our core and transitioning it to more of a solutions-led company. We're seeing now more work, especially in the mid-market, around robotics, process automation, and AI like we've never seen before. Why? You think about SMB. SMB is challenged today with three major problems. Number one, we're all getting hit with inflation. Costs are going through the roof. You can't charge more. Your profitability is going down. You got to drive productivity. Second, we're all short on labor today. Schools, hospitals, universities, law firms, you pick it, we're all short on labor. And then the last piece is cost of capital, right? You're now starting to see 8, 9, 10, sometimes double-digit cost of capital. And so those things are a perfect storm for a small business. They can't handle it. So I say small businesses have enterprise challenges, but they don't have enterprise solutions. What does Xerox do? Xerox can go into a church, can go into a hospital, go into a university, take a look at your workflow because we're already there. We already know your processes. We can add RPA and AI on top of it and reduce the administration burden that you have. Simple example, on the West Coast, there was a hospital, had 11 days backlog, 11 days backlog of submitting insurance firm. Think about that. 11 days. Think about the cash flow. Think about the impact on a hospital. Then you can add RPA and AI. You could take that 11 days and get it done in one day. By the way, the quality that we're doing is now higher than the administrators. Why? Because you're not depending on people keying and swivel chairing between system and system. So your error rate goes down, your speed to cash goes up. That's no longer selling a printer into procurement. That's now selling a cash flow solution to a CFO. Dramatically changing, okay? And I say the last thing for us is we talk about reinvention. We're reinventing the company in three major ways, right? Simplifying everything we do, taking everything I've done in my career, big transformation, simplifying everything we do, end-to-end processes, and simplifying, adding technology. We are embedding inside of every one of our processes, RPA, AI will embed ChatGPT. My vision when you look forward, Brian, is, how do we leverage technology inside of everything that we do so that you have the same consumer look and feel that you have at home, you have inside of Xerox. And the same thing for our customers and our clients going forward, right? And so you think about, you go home today, Alexa, what's the weather? Alexa, where's my phone? Those things are normal consumer experiences. We're going to replicate that internally inside of Xerox to try to get that consumer look and feel in everything we do. So the first thing is simplification and driving technology. We created Global Business Services for the first time here this month or last month, literally with inside the company to do exactly what I've done at other companies and what John Bruno, as my president and COO, has done at Aon, really driving simplification, driving automation. Second piece of it is, how do you think about transforming our products and our geographies, right? One of the things you think about, we have unbelievable innovation, unbelievable driving next generation productivity. Where are we going to play in the future? Your cell phone without a network connection is completely useless. Useless. AI without data, completely useless. Where do we play? Okay, there are billions and billions and billions of pages in infrastructure that go through our infrastructure. Every one of those pages, every one of those scans has value in it for our clients. How do we unlock that value of that client? All right, you can't talk to a CEO today, you can't talk to anybody today that doesn't utter the word, what is AI going to do for me? Well, it first starts with, what are you going to do with your data? How do you get your data ready? All right. And we've been orchestrating that for years, right? One of the big concerns about AI is origin and destination. Where is information coming from? Where is it going to? And did it get changed in motion? I've been doing that for years here within Xerox. We know the sender, we know the receiver, we know the security protocol in between. We know if a document is classified or it's sensitive, we redact it or completely encrypt it if it has to be. We make sure that that document is not altered in process. Same thing with AI. All right. And so we will be, especially for the medium-sized businesses, the SI for AI in the medium businesses. Not we're going to go create LLMs, not we're going to go create algorithms that drive industry solutions. No, we're going to be in the space of how do you drive and orchestrate data, whether it's physical data to digital, whether it's documents, Word, by the way, video, voice, all of this is data. And then data in motion, Brian, right? What do you do with sensors today? All right. I really believe it's not just static data, but the real change, the real value that AI will bring is the ability to be able to process information real time with data in motion. All right. And you see it with video and facial recognition and certain things that we all see today. So Xerox is going to play in that AI space, new products and new services, but more importantly, inside the clients that we already serve today.
It's really interesting to hear, and interesting to hear the applications, right? We talked about that not too long ago, and I was talking about what you're hearing about AI and Gen AI, and that not a lot of people have their arms around their true business cases of it, and you've done a great job of explaining, where people should be looking, right? Because I think that's the next mountain. After investing a lot of money on data science and what have you, there's still a lot of companies who are saying we're not there yet. We don't really know what to do, but obviously this is going to be with us for a while. I wonder, but just as a sidebar too for our listeners, you mentioned John Bruno, who's your president and COO, someone very similar to you, and someone I remember a long time ago you recommended to me, just like Abby recommended you, as someone who has done a really interesting job, or had a really interesting trajectory from being a CIO up to a COO now. But yeah, I wonder, I was going to ask you, about how CIOs should be thinking about this, what you've gleaned from this, from your perspective, for CIOs who are running big transformations. You're running a big transformation. You've run big transformations. A lot of the time they're saying, I'm going through digital transformation. I'm reinventing the way that we're doing, this process or that. I'd love to hear those lessons. But first, you just went through a lot about what Xerox is doing. And I wonder, as we talk about the sort of the building blocks of your career, do you think you'd be able to speak about this that comprehensively and that authoritatively if you didn't have the technology background that you do?
No, it's the foundation of everything I've done. I think we've talked about it, probably 68 plus M&A integrations in my background, right? Started from a technology background, whether it's application consolidation, system consolidation. But at the end of the day, you're putting two businesses together, processes together, and you learn how to drive change. Digital transformation, big reinvention, whatever it may be, the technology understanding, but it's the things that you learn from implementing technology. How do you drive through change? How do you get individuals to adapt and drive to new processes? Look, we all have access to SAP and ServiceNow. You pick your great software solution of choice. How many companies fail and how many companies succeed? The delta between failing and succeeding is just leadership. That's simple. Okay. One company didn't have the right leadership. One company did. All right. Driving through that change, the ability to be able to get your environment, your clients, your employees to adapt and embrace that change and go through it is the key. How do you set up those programs? How do you measure those programs, right? And so when you think about it, the technologists and specifically CIOs, that's what we do every day. Just happens to be a network and servers and laptops and, moving stuff to the cloud. We drive change every day. And the reality is we are really good at seeing technology vision, the where you are today, where you're going, and then the delta between CIOs that drive change and the CIOs that stay in the operation and technology world. CIOs that drive change have the vision. They can inspire. They can make the business and business leaders get to a higher level of execution than they would do without them. That's it. Okay. We talk a lot about some of the things that we did in the past in other businesses, right? When I talk about, crawling to mediocrity, run the grade, I would use that line inside of, executive committees. I'd use it with boards. It resonates, right? If we're going to do something hard, let's do something great. Simple concept. Okay. But great leaders take simple things or take hard things and make it simple, right? You take a look at, whether you like Elon or don't like Elon, the reality is his vision of putting a spaceship in the sky and then bringing it back, simple. But what it took to get it done, extremely hard. Okay. And you could do the same thing, whether it's Chambers or whether it's Gates. I mean, these are visionaries that had a vision of what they were going to do. I mean, at the time, you go back when Gates said, I'm going to put a laptop on every person on earth. I mean, really? Okay, there are people on this earth that only have water. Now we think about that's pretty silly today. Okay. But back then, the supply chain didn't exist. Certainly, manufacturing capabilities that we see today didn't exist, right? That vision and that understanding of what it can do to drive change and candidly great for humanity, big difference, right? And that's the difference. Right? I put that and get it back to the CIO world. CIOs have the ability to be able to see it, especially today. And I started with it earlier. Technology is the slowest today they'll ever be in our lives, meaning that CIOs have the ability today to set the future of driving change and driving transformation. And by the way, that only gets more accelerated each and every day. You can't find a board today without a technology committee. You can't find a board today that doesn't talk about cybersecurity. You can't find a board today that doesn't understand, oh, what's this AI thing? Oh, privacy, data? What's our policy? Right? And so we're now all driving at an incredible level the elevation of the CIO role. And the CIO has to be able to step up and be at the board level, be at the business level to drive those changes.
Right, right. And it's been great seeing that. Like you said, companies starting technology committees, appointing more CIOs and CISOs to the boards. To add to that, so you've been talking about leadership, which I love, and brings me to a fun thing we do here on Tech Whispers, and we like to have a mystery questioner join us. And this person is a person you know well with a great question to continue the thread on your leadership style. So here's our mystery questioner.
You've often said leadership is lonely. Can you elaborate on what you mean by that?
I think it's Vicky Hildebrand. And look, I've always said, as you rise, not just in the CIO ranks, but as you rise within companies, there are less people left of you, less people right of you that can collaborate to help you solve a problem. When you get to this chair, everybody is looking to you for answers. And it gets very lonely from the perspective of there's nobody around you. CIOs, when they're in the middle of a crisis, cyber attack, systems down, network, whatever it may be, you look left, you look right, it's all you. Okay. And you have to feel comfortable with that. And by the way, a lot of people are not comfortable with that. Okay. As you ascend, the people that you used to work with as peers, used to go out and have a cup of coffee with, those jobs and those relationships radically change. And so my point is, as you rise, you got to feel comfortable with getting lonelier, not having as many peers, right? The CIO community, that's why we love these small off-site roundtables with CIOs alone, because we love misery and we can talk about our misery openly because it's lonely. And that's the reality. Okay.
Yeah.
You can talk only about, oh, shoot, I got a ransomware attack. How'd you really feel? Okay. When you get a ransomware attack, you are the leader in a company. You have to be able to show confidence, show the ability to lead through that. But in the background, you're like a duck. Your feet are going, they're paddling, and you're like, okay, let's hope we got this under control and all the things we put in place and processes and all this works. But it's lonely. You're sitting there. So that's what I mean. As you get higher in your career and as you get to a CIO and certainly as you get to a CEO, the role gets lonelier and lonelier.
Right, right. So it's so important. We always tell people, you can't start networking too late, right? It's something that you have to be doing from the beginning because your network's going to take different directions. And like you said, you surrounded yourself by people who could help you understand what some of those other roles that you were aspiring to, what those could be. And other times you're going to have people who just have walked in your shoes or have climbed that mountain before. So yeah, the idea of getting together with roundtables and knowledge sharing groups and sharing and solving each other's problems is so important. Talk about, you just mentioned it, being lonely at the top, and the CEO office is one of the most lonely. But I think CIOs can learn a lot from that perspective as well. And just I know we've talked about the idea of just staying true to yourself, right, with everything else that's going on around you, all the pressure, all the opportunity, the obviously busy schedules, and you're focused on still being Steve. And just curious, I think a lot of people can learn lessons from this. I don't think it's you're ever too old to learn lessons on, how do you balance between being a CEO, a husband, a father, a friend, how do you make that work for you?
Yeah, I think for me, Brian, look, I've been blessed to get here. And anytime I think it's about me, I got a problem. Right? So many things had to go right to get to this seat, from my support from my family to people that I've networked with, to individuals that gave me a chance. By the way, people who yelled at me, screamed at me, who I thought were bad managers, taught me an awful lot about how not to treat people. There's nothing wrong with that, right? And so, none of us get here. None of us get here by just sheer luck or what they can do themselves. Okay? You get here from hard work. You get here from taking advantage of the opportunities and the breaks. I always tell them when I mentor people, I've always had and I've always taken the hardest road in my career. I've always taken the hardest road. I love challenge because at the end of it, it's incredible. I mean, I can see the Wall Street Journal 3 years from now, 4 years from now, talking about the great transformation and turnaround of Xerox. I could see it. I could feel it. It's in my bone. That's what I love. Okay. When the Kodaks of the world, the Pitney Bowes, you pick your company of choice, which with great companies now trying to reinvent and get back to greatness. IBM, right? Great company trying to get back to greatness. Okay. When you can write that and, you have taken an incredible brand of 100+ years that has had so much great culture, great people. Every day on my internal website, we can see, people here 50 years, 40 years, 30 years. It's amazing. The culture that we built and the people and the passion inside the company, got to preserve that. Got to make sure we pay that forward and it's going to live for the next 100 years, right? And so for me, Brian, it's, how do you say every day I'm coming here with a purpose, with a challenge, but never, ever, ever think it's about you and you alone. Because when you think that, you're in trouble. Okay. Even today, we are in the process of putting together a new board. And as I interviewed new board members, I have been very, very open. It's like, I want your help. There are CEOs who don't want board member help. Oh, by the way, there are board members who don't want to help the management team. No, I want and need your help. Okay. If I think I can deal with every SEC requirement, every new cyber disclosure requirement, all the things that are happening today, whether it's Gaza, whether it's Ukraine, Russia, Red Sea, Taiwan, and you pick it, you can't solve these things by yourself. It's virtually impossible. Okay, what you can solve is have an incredible network, have an incredible team around you to make everything successful, right? And that's really what it's all about. Not about me, not about anything I've ever done. I just happen to be the person to be the face of Xerox and been blessed to get here.
But that resilience and that grit and all the things that you've talked about that have been, again, just constant threads throughout, they show. It's almost like they've kind of grown up, right, with you through your career. And I could personally attest, I've known you for a long time, and you're still the same Steve I remember. And it wasn't long ago I bumped into you, and you got to meet my kids, and you acted like you knew them their whole lives, and that says something. So staying with that, on the personal side, Steve, another fun thing we do here is, Wallet & Associates has been developing the human side of technology for 40 years now, and we're committed to giving $150,000 annually in scholarships to our own TechLX program, which is a IT-specific, cohort-based leadership development program. And we like to offer each guest the chance to gift a seat into the program to usually a STEM-based nonprofit program. I know you've got a lot of different interests, a lot of different charities that you support. Do you have an organization in mind that you'd like to give a seat in the program to?
Brian, thank you so much. First of all, thank you to you and your company for giving and donating. It's one of the greatest gifts we can do, and that is to donate and give back. I was on the board and the chair of the SAM Fund many years ago.
Yes.
SAM Fund merged with Expect Miracles. It's still near and dear to my heart, how we can help cancer survivors, especially young cancer survivors, as well as trying to find cures for some of these terrible diseases that we see today. So If you can do and donate to Expect Miracles, it would be an honor for you to do that.
Excellent. Yeah, great. A fantastic organization. Love to see how much they've grown too over time. So thanks for your contribution to that and to so many other causes that I know are near and dear to your heart. And so it's really great to see you, Steve. Thank you very much for your time today, and look forward to talking with you again. Thanks for sharing with our community.
Brian, my honor. Always good to speak with you.
All right, what great leadership perspectives from Steve Bandrowczak. His personal and professional achievements have been forged by resilience and finding the art of the possible, and those are key lessons for technology and business leaders to emulate in your own ways. And next week, check out the Tech Whisperers blog on CIO.com for more of Steve's perspectives on the CIO role and what they need to do to deliver in these constantly changing times. Thanks.
You've been listening to Tech Whisperers, inside the playbook of the best digital leaders, a Woolette and Associates podcast. Keep connected with us by subscribing to the show in your favorite podcast player. If you like what you've heard, please rate the show, as this helps us connect the world's best digital leaders with those who aspire to learn, grow, and thrive in this amazing profession. Thanks for listening. Until next time.